we invented a lot of these ideas of, coprocessors and rollups and validiums and blah, blah, blah. And like the whole, we created this whole taxonomy. We analyzed the hell out of it for like 5 years because we staked our lives and our futures on this vision of the world coming true. And it sort of feels like, look, I understand that, the EVM world and the SVM world have at times been adversarial, but it's like at least show enough respect to just like call them rollups if they're rollups.
This reminds me of like people in the late 90s, early 2000s who were like Windows versus Mac, where like, a memory allocator in Windows would have a certain type of name and a memory allocator and a Mac would have a different type of name. And they were realistically the same thing, but because they called them different things, the two types of developers would like fight.
Not a dividend.
It's a tale of two clans.
Now, your losses are on someone else's balance sheet.
Generally speaking, airdrops are kind of pointless anyways.
Unnamed trading firms who are very involved.
I like that ETH is the ultimate Ponzi.
DeFi protocols are the antidote to this problem.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Chopping Block. Every couple of weeks, the four of us get together and give the industry insider's perspective on the crypto topics of the day. So quick intros. First, you got Tom, the DeFi maven and master of memes.
Hello, everyone.
Next, we've got Tarun. He's not here yet. He will be joining us later, but we're here in Singapore and everyone's kind of running around a little bit crazy. But he will be here shortly. He is the Gigabrain and Grand Poobah at Gauntlet. Today, we've got special guest, the main man at Helios. We have Mert. Mert Mumtaz, I believe is your full name.
Yeah, close enough.
The alliteration is wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'm Steve, the head hype man at Dragonfly. We are early stage investors in crypto, but I want to caveat that nothing we say here is investment advice, legal advice, or even life advice. Please see choppingblock.xyz for more disclosures. So we're here, token 2049. Mert, is this your first token 2049 or have you been before?
No, actually my first one was the biblical flood in Dubai.
Okay, but this is your first one in Singapore.
It's actually my first time in Asia and Singapore.
First time in Asia, period.
Yeah, so I mean, I was at Korea Blockchain Week, and I came a little earlier just to make sure I adjust for jet lag by the time this one came around. But yeah, first time in Asia.
Wow, what do you have against Asia?
I don't like flying too much. But now that I've been here, I did get food poisoning, so I have that against
So
it.
now you're even more against Asia.
No, actually.
Were you like in one of those open air meat markets?
No, I don't even know what I did. Because I have like a swallowing problem, so I just really drink stuff and soup and alcohol. But apparently, because you can't drink the tap water in Malaysia, and people are basically like Naval commented on my post. Yeah. He's like, like you just basically can't do anything or eat anything or that's been in contact with water. And it's like, okay.
Huh. So you got food poisoning in Malaysia?
I'm speculating, but probably that would line up.
That checks out.
Yeah.
What were you doing in Malaysia?
So Solana has this thing called Super Team, which is like a bunch of decentralized communities around, let's say, the globe. And we did a Super Team Solana dinner in KL because, between Korea and Singapore, there was this gap and everybody went to like Bali or Thailand. But I was like, I've never been to KL, so that seems interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you regret it?
I actually liked it.
Never coming back to Asia after this. Okay, got it.
I actually liked KL quite a bit. It's like very interesting mix of like Islamic art plus like Chinese art and then like some griminess, but then like some modern buildings.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. I like it.
It is cool. Okay, but never going back. It's all right. It's all right. We don't have a Malaysian audience. They're not going to hear about this. Okay, well that's, so first impressions of Singapore. I guess you, first time here, what do you think so far?
Oh, I think it's super well designed. I've been a pretty big fanboy of Lee Kuan Yew. So I make quite a few memes about him. I think it's very well designed. I think like the one thing was the like no Zins or like no nicotine pouches into the country. And I was
you a consumer?
Oh shit. Yeah.
That's a deal breaker.
You are. Okay.
Yeah. I was like, you cannot do this during Solana's main event.
That is true.
Right. And, but it turns out, and I'm not going to disclose them, people brought them in anyways. I was like super scared. I was like, because I think the propaganda is a little strong. They're like, oh, you'll get caned or go to jail or like get fined like $1 billion. And like nobody checks anything. And so.
Not that you would rat them out on a show.
Yeah, I would not rat them out. But I've had a few meetings requests and it'll be like, hi, Mert. One, I have Zins. Two, can we meet to discuss something?
Wow.
So it's smart BD.
So you really open yourself up to bribery, really, now that you're broadcasting all this.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. All right. Well, let's hope that Singaporean officials are not watching the chopping
I
block.
feel like that's how you know when you have good rule of law is like people are so scared of even like the concept of breaking, a minor law that they're like, I'm not even going to try it. The gum, it's not worth the time. Like, whereas I feel like in the US, it's like the opposite. People are like, yeah, fuck it, I'm going to jaywalk. No one's going to take me. And
well, I found an arbitrage, which is that so nicotine pouch is illegal, gum is illegal, but nicotine gum is legal. So just went to the pharmacy.
How does that work? Yeah, what?
Yeah,
Shouldn't it be extra illegal? I feel like
that's what I would have figured, but like you must have some alternative to quitting cigarettes.
To be clear, I don't believe gum is literally illegal. It's illegal to import gum.
Yes,
but having gum, chewing gum is actually fine. Like the thing about gum being illegal was like in the 90s or something. Yeah, in the early days of Singapore, but it's not literally true anymore.
I've even heard a lot of the stuff. It's lax. I mean, like people. If you come in with like a vape from Malaysia, you're not gonna get caned. It's like no one is. They're looking for people who are like mass importing and selling these things, which is what is illegal, not a single individual bringing in a pack of gum.
But to be clear, if you bring any kind of hard drugs into Singapore,
the hard drugs is
or even soft drugs, right? Like any kind of hardness of drug in Singapore is very, very no. It's one of the most restrictive laws in the world of like fairly developed rich countries.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. It's just the nicotine stuff. It's like you already have nicotine gum. You have cigarettes, so can I just take like the
I mean, look, we're addicted. It's not fair. How can you?
Yeah,
I mean, okay, it's tough. So this week, of course, is also Solana Breakpoint, which is the big flagship conference. I think it's happening Friday, Saturday, I believe. What should people be looking out for with respect to Breakpoint this year? Obviously, yourself.
Yeah, I think the biggest differences are there's no panels. So it's just going to be debates and 5-minute rapid fire kind of product keynotes. And then a very few fireside chats. So me and Toli will be doing one to close out the first day. And then Balaji and Raj are doing one to open it up.
Wait, how is that no panels?
Yeah. I also was wondering this, but I think it's because like it's just two people having a chat as opposed to like 5-6 people.
Sure.
And they say 2's a chat, 3's a panel.
That's
And then and then the other important thing, the really important thing will be the Fire Dancer team. They're doing a few talks. Nobody has more than one speaking slot this year except for Fire Dancer, who I believe have 3. So Kevin Bowers, obviously the Gigabrain behind Fire Dancer, will be doing a talk, and I would recommend everybody check that out because they're going to be they've been doing some work.
Nice, very interesting. So before we jump into Fire Dancer, because I do want to talk about Fire Dancer, I want to start with yourself. So I think everybody knows Mert largely as a sort of online attack dog. I think that's probably your first and foremost reputation, but you're also a founder. You run an infrastructure company on Solana. Tell us about the company that you run and also how you came into the role as being the Solana attack dog. Sure. And also the second most famous bald man in crypto.
Are you the first?
No, I'm third.
Well, so I used to work at Coinbase. I was a tech lead for the platform, or a part of the platform team called Ledger, which...
So you worked for the most famous bald man in crypto?
Yes. That's why I lost my hair. I actually had hair when I was in Coinbase.
Is that right?
There's an emoji actually, because we work with Coinbase now, and it's a Mert emoji from Coinbase, and it's me with hair, because I actually had it.
Oh, damn.
And so I was working there around 2021, and we were supporting all the chains. So I used to do research into like even Polkadot, Avalanche, Solana. And like my background is in math, but also communications engineering. So like signals, satellites, stuff like that. And while looking at all the L1s and the different kind of white papers, Solana was actually structured or engineered more like a communication system more than others. And I thought that was like quite interesting. And there was a lot that you could actually apply. And so I just started building stuff on my own. This is before like Solana had any explorers or like zero analytics tools. And people would just say like bizarre shit on Twitter, like NFT influencers would say something like, oh, the supply is running up quickly and stuff, but nobody would actually be able to check their claims. So I would write like some scripts and be like, oh, actually you just minted all of it to yourself. And then now you're trying to scam your users.
So this is like 2020.
2020, like right around Degenerate Apes mint, like when Solana really went from like 8 to like 46 and then just kept going up. It was around that time. And so I was always like, let's say I always had an attack dog mentality. I would just do it internally or like on more niche topics.
Okay.
And then while doing that, I basically was like, there's a lot of problems building on Solana because I was building on it myself, and I wanted to build these things for myself first. And then, at the time, I was also super annoyed with the lack of real applications in crypto, which I'm still quite annoyed by. And I basically said to myself, like, okay, there's two paths here. I can go ahead and build on Ethereum today. And what I would need for success in that case would be the merge has to happen because it hadn't happened yet. 4844 needs to go live successfully. L2s need to get to stage 2. And like all these kind of conditionals need to happen. And each time there's a conditional, the probability of success, when you multiply them together, it decreases over time. Versus on Solana, it was like, okay, the chain mostly works. It's certainly not perfect. But if somebody can go and fix some of these very fixable problems, then I think we can get app developers to build here right away. And so that was the thesis. And yes, just started building, left Coinbase, started Helios, recruited my university roommates, Liam and Nick, to be my co-founders. And at first we released something called human readable APIs on Solana because Solana is famously unreadable. And it was always like that. And as we kept doing that, we noticed a lot of other problems in the stack, like the RPCs kind of sucked. The indexing is too expensive. Transactions don't land, like archival sucks, all these things like scaling, ZK compression. And we were actually like a relatively successful business at first. Like we made money, we were getting customers and growing relatively good or well over time. And then FTX happened. And around that time, I would already see people on the internet like Justin Bonds or something back when he hated Solana, say like random like false things like Solana has a fraudulent design pattern because like who the block leader will be. Therefore, you can spam them and then stop the network. But then it's like most chains actually have a predictable block schedule,
right?
Including Ethereum 2, actually. It was called Ethereum 2 at that point.
Yeah.
And like I would call these things out, and then people would just like, but I would call them out because I'm just generally an angry person, and so I would call them out pretty aggressively.
Where does that come from? Where does that come from, you think?
I think it's genetics in a sense.
Okay.
Like Turkish people in general
when I met
are
you, you
angry.
do not seem like an angry person, but I would say like in the online persona is super aggro. Where like how do you reconcile that in your mind?
Yeah. So it's here's how I think about it.
Yeah.
In person, people generally don't say ridiculous things, but on the internet they say anything, and like they're quite, especially on crypto Twitter, like people. Some guy who like trades some charts, did like a poetry major, will talk about like very specific Solana infrastructure stuff. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, that's completely false.
Yeah.
Like it happens in person too. Like most people don't catch me in person because it's not a very scalable media, let's say.
Sure.
But like some guy was at Korea Blockchain and he was like, what do you think about Solana being like an only meme coin chain? And I was like I was ready to like, damn. So anyway, that's I had already been doing that for quite a bit. And then FTX happened. And I was actually happy that FTX happened in some sense because one of my main things with the chain was everybody hated it because of FTX and SPF. They're like, oh, that guy's like weird and stuff.
Yeah.
Predatory. And my actual first thought, which was, I guess, naive looking back, was great. Now that the biggest predator is gone, so now there's no excuse to hate on the
nothing
chain.
in the way. Yeah, nobody will ever say a bad thing about Solana again.
Yeah. So, and then to my surprise, of course, everybody started shitting on it way more. And then, but the thing that really got me was they started making comments on the chain itself, like the technical architecture and the scalability. And then they somehow like threaded like SBF in there and stuff. And I was like, that is not an argument. Like you're conflating a bunch of different things. And this would happen every day. And I had some knowledge about Solana and EVM chains and all these other things from my time at Coinbase. And I basically just said what I thought was correct. Sometimes it wasn't correct and I would learn from that. But most of the times when people talk about Solana, one thing that I've noticed is a lot of Solana people know much more about the EVM because EVM has been around for longer, has better documentation, frankly, and a bigger ecosystem. But the counter is not true. Like a lot of people coming from EVM don't quite understand Solana ecosystem that well. And so being like one of the few people, and I'm not the only one, that actually had a relatively well understanding of both, and then combine that with being bald and angry, I think that's kind of what led to it.
Got it. One of the things that we were that we've been discussing quite a bit, and we've also talked about on the show in the past, is the differential between the funding that has gone to the EVM ecosystem versus the SVM ecosystem. And it does feel like, this year has very much been the year of SVM. We've seen the rise of, Ellipsis, Eclipse. Isn't there, I believe there's one more that's also SVM based. Of course, there's what's the virtualized EVM on top of Solana?
Neon.
Neon. There's Neon. So it just feel like the Solana ecosystem is growing and the quantum of capital available in the Solana ecosystem is growing. But it hasn't always been that way, right? I think last year was probably kind of the valley of darkness for a lot of Solana developers. And then before that, there was this almost FTX monoculture where basically FTX and Multicoin, and then Horizon, I think it's called now? Sino, yeah. Formerly known as Sino, were sort of funding all the projects in Solana. So from your perspective, and I know this is something that you've commented on in the past, how do you think about the availability of capital for Solana and SVM-based founders relative to what it was like in the past?
So relative to what it was in the past, I think it's better. Like when we first raised the seed round for Helios, it was very difficult.
This was when?
This was 2022 June.
So this is like post Three Arrows collapsing.
I don't quite remember the framing of everything, but
okay.
It was.
But Terra had already collapsed. The market was already coming down.
I think so.
Yeah, because Terra collapsed in March.
Yeah,
March of 22.
Yeah, I think that had happened. It was very hard for me to raise for Helios, and everybody said no, basically. And a lot of the things were like, well, the developers are all on the EVM, so like, why would you make? And because we were also exclusively vertically integrated onto Solana, we didn't, play this game where we just go to different chains and then keep, making marginal improvements, but then the product suffers because your focus is split. So everybody was super skeptical. Everybody passed except for like Reciprocal, who co-led the round with Chapter 1. So it was pretty bad back then. And then obviously FTX happened. That made it even worse. A lot of my friends who were pretty smart people just could not raise. I had to because I have a pretty good network, let's say, within VCs and especially Solana, and like people just couldn't raise. People were blowing up, etc. So it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
Now it's certainly much better, especially on the earlier stage stuff. Because I'm an angel now as well, so there's a lot of the amount of deal flow has increased quite a bit.
Yeah,
and it's also much more prod or consumer focused, or like deep in focused or something like that. Not too many infra plays on Solana. There's certainly some, like the SVM stuff, but for Solana the L1 itself, there's not too much infra. And I think consumer startups in general are harder to fund because a lot less certainty around, how this grows, the go-to-market and all this.
Yeah.
So I think that also plays a role. Like, I don't think it's purely a Solana thing. I think it's also the class of applications being built on Solana. But yeah, it was bad. Now it's better. I would say though, so we just did our third round. I don't think any team on Solana has actually done a third round. I think the only exceptions are Matchheat and Phantom, but they're multi-chain. But like a Solana specific team, I'm not sure. Maybe Jito might be another one.
Jito, I think they did 2 rounds and then they launched their token, and then they might be doing another one. But I think a lot of the reason for that is that they just launched tokens. And then of course, Jupiter never raised venture capital, I believe.
Correct.
So I think did Radium raise multiple rounds?
I don't even know.
It's Phoenix.
So they did a Series A.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
But to your point, it's more, this is the way kind of capital markets are forming in crypto, is like you do a seed, you do an A. If you have a token, you launch a token, and then maybe do like a treasury sale or something, versus many rounds of capital going into a team that's launching like a DeFi protocol or something.
Yeah, I think part of maybe what explains that as well, as you mentioned, there's not that much infrastructure being funded on Solana. In large part, this is because Solana is the infrastructure, right? Whereas with Ethereum, you sort of need all these, wings and kind of extra things built down the side to support what people actually want to do on chain. With Solana, the whole idea of Solana is that, okay, it's kind of a monolithic chain. You don't really need that many augmentations to it, although we'll talk about the concept of those augmentations. And as a result, I think it more tends to be infrastructure projects that, one, are more capital intensive. They require a lot more funding. And two, they tend to take longer to launch a token. Whereas, a lot of the consumer apps or things, like a DEX or something, you really, you need like, 5 to 10 million to get it off the ground, launch it. And then, generally it's token, and then you sell tokens OTC if you ever need it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah. But like the thing that's changed is during the first, let's say, or the past 2 years, it was, people just thought Solana was going to die. So I think VCs thought it'd be a very risky bet. Some were comfortable taking it, some weren't. But I think now that's changed. Like it's quite clear that Solana is going to be very hard to kill at this point.
Yeah.
And so it's de-risked it for a lot of people. Now there's still risks, I would say for sure. But it's like there's like a hackathon, the Radar hackathon. There's a few incubators on Solana. Some of the Alliance teams are actually choosing Solana for some of the first times ever I've seen. So
some of the Alliance teams? You mean
like Alliance DAO guys?
Oh yeah. The incubator.
Yeah. So it's certainly changed. It's still not like perfect, but like I think you probably heard of EBOLA.
I have. We're very familiar with the concept. So can you define what EBOLA means?
I think it stands for EVM logic.
Are they EVM bags over logic affliction?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that used to be pretty prevalent. I don't think it's that prevalent anymore. I could be wrong on this, just based on my experience funding teams myself. Yeah. But also raising myself, like we had no shortage of interest.
So, well, it's funny you mentioned that. So, somebody from the Solana Foundation, Akshay, what's his name?
Yep,
Akshay. So Akshay maybe it's not Akshay. No, sorry, it was somebody else from the Solana Foundation. Subtweeted this show. And basically, I think that's where they went public with the EBOLA acronym, which I think was something that people in the Solana ecosystem knew, but it wasn't something that was aired publicly. And they actually specifically call out Tom as being an example of somebody with EBOLA. And so, okay, what does EBOLA mean?
I totally missed this. I feel like their efforts were wasted.
Potentially a little bit. So anyway, so EBOLA basically means that you have too heavy EVM bags and you are biased against Solana. And I think it was the show where we were talking about the delta of capital available in the Solana ecosystem versus the EVM ecosystem, and whether it makes sense for an entrepreneur who's building a consumer app or whatever to like build on Base, build on Arbitrum, build on Solana, whatever. And so I think the Solana Foundation at least feels like there's a lot of VCs who still have a very strong bias against Solana, and apparently they think we're in that club. Curious so you said that you think that that's less of a thing these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably not consensus view, but I do think it's like kind of overblown at this point. I think like infrastructure is just easier to fund. And it makes like there's a lot of, because like, I would say most VC investing, not all, is relatively social in some sense. Like, oh, there's somebody leading that round. Hey, we've seen this before. Now what happens if it's on this chain, et cetera. So it's easier to underwrite in a sense. Yeah. Whereas Solana apps tend to be a bit crazier. Like Pump.Fund, for example. Yes. It's like, what even is this? Like I didn't even know what it was. I wouldn't have funded it myself. So there's also that. But like if you build a product and have customers and have some traction, like a VC at this point is not going to say no because you're building on an L1 I don't like, in my view. Yeah.
Well, so there is a little bit of history on this show in particular about Solana, right? So we've had Anatoly on the show, we've had Lucas from Gito on the show, and in the past, so if you go back probably like 2021, I think is when we had the most critical episodes, I think, of Solana back then, where that was when, Solana fee markets were falling over. There was a lot of downtime. There was a lot of criticism back then. And this was very much the FTX era of, the block explorers were just, really just unworkable. That you couldn't see contract code. There were no deterministic builds. So there was a lot of stuff that we criticized Solana for very publicly. And I think a lot of that landed as seemingly with some of the foundation who now are not very happy that we have said a lot of things that are negative about Solana, but almost everything that, and then traditionally Tarun would be the pro Solana guy, and I think he was they were invested much earlier into they did the seed round of Jito, they did a lot of early investments in there was some other decks on Drift, they did Drift very early, and my take is that almost all the criticisms that I levied against Solana in 2021, Solana addressed, right? Pretty much everything that I just mentioned is fixed now. And, Solana has a real fee market. It's not all the way there, but it's like definitely way better than what it was in 2021. There are deterministic builds now. You can actually see verified contracts on block explorers and like actually see the corresponding code. There's a lot more of the dominant applications on Solana are open source. In the past, it was like mostly closed source. There's just a lot of things that Solana has actually really improved to get to parity with what people generally expect from public blockchains. But I think and as a result, like we've also spent a lot more time in the Solana ecosystem over the last 2 years, and we've made a lot more investments in that ecosystem. Now, as an investor, we invest a ton into non-EVM ecosystems. We're big investors in, Near, Aptos. We've done some. Oh, it's Tarun here.
Yeah, I was like, what are you?
Okay, wait, why is Tarun looking at?
I don't know. He was like looking through the peephole.
Tarun, what are you doing, man? Come on.
They told me to wait until you gave me a signal.
Oh no! Yeah, come sit down. Come sit down. This you came in at a perfect time. We were just talking about the history of being critical of Solana on the show, and we were talking about the concept of EBOLA. You saw that tweet, yeah? The EBOLA tweet from the Solana Foundation that was calling out the chopping block for being full of EVM bags.
Yeah. Well, the first time I heard Ebola was from Lily.
I
believe it was her.
Yeah, well, she was the one who coined the term, and I think they maybe it was Jack from the Solana Foundation. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But anyway, so yeah, my claim is that Solana has actually really transformed a lot of the things that we criticize it for in 2020, or I criticize it for in 2021 and 2022, to the point where now I think for you to not consider it a VC investment because they're building on Solana is just kind of insane, right? It's very clearly the ecosystem of consumer, of DePIN, obviously of Memecoins is a huge part of the activity, but just the raw amount of retail activity happening on Solana, it is very, very clearly the winner of 2024.
But by the way, are you being nice all of a sudden because you put the two bald guys on one side and it's like
no, it's
solidarity?
because you were going to take so long to be here. I didn't want to have him sitting alone on one side. I thought it would be kind of sad. So no, that's not the idea. But anyway, wanted to get your reaction to that.
Yeah, I think it's one of my favorite parts about Solana, which is like the culture. Let's say set at the top by Tolly is this engineering culture. And engineers criticize each other and the tech relentlessly, and in public. Like me and Tolly will debate in public. Him and Trent will debate in public. That's kind of just how it's just how like any engineering system works generally, especially open source stuff. Like it's all debates. And that's kind of the reason why, like during the FTX stuff, people were saying all these things like, oh, it's an unscalable chain, it's doomed, whatever. And then we'd be like, well, actually, we just added fee markets and stuff, so that's actually not a thing anymore. And so I actually tweeted, I believe 2 days ago, what I believe to be the most important part of any new ecosystem is kind of this culture of open critique and like actually trying to pursue some truth, as opposed to like trying to manufacture narratives that probably will die out in like, X months once the price starts doing different things. So I think like fundamentally blockchains are distributed systems, and like the metal needs to work. And the only way you're going to discover problems is first you have to be, open to receiving critique, but then also being able to ship in a very timely manner to fix those things. That's my favorite part about Solana. It's just that culture.
Yeah.
Because believe me, there's a lot of material there to hate on, which I call them out people, I'm going to talk for Solana for sure, but I also, I would say I call out Solana more than basically anybody alive on how many things we get wrong.
This is absolutely true. And I give you a lot of respect for this, is that, at a time when I remember this was like 2022, when everybody on Twitter was getting mad about Solana labeling vote transactions as being part of TPS. And it was like, oh, we have, tens of thousands or whatever, 50,000 TPS. You are one of the most fervent people within the Solana ecosystem being like, yeah, we should get this right, because we still have great performance, right? It's nothing to be ashamed of. What Solana's on-chain transaction load actually is. But now I think Solana has again moved past almost like a sort of youthful insecurity about just saying, look, here's how the chain works. And it works really well as long as you're willing to entertain those trade-offs. But your intellectual honesty about it is something that I've always respected.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even, I just get annoyed. Like, when people,
anger is the primary motivator across the board.
Some of the these new data sites will say oh, Solana just hit like a all-time high in blockchain history for daily active addresses. And I was like, please shut the hell up. Like that's a completely useless thing. I was almost actually going to build like a little cursor AI video. Like, okay, I'm just going to actually create all these addresses myself and inflate the metrics real time to show you how stupid this is. And so it still happens in all ecosystems, but I understand Solana the most myself. And so I think there's some moral obligation to criticize internally so that, like you said, you do learn from it and improve and then get better over time.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that has been the most obvious looking from the outside, is how quickly Solana has improved as an ecosystem over the last couple of years. And in a way, I think the separation from FTX was clearly very painful for people in the Solana ecosystem, because it was such a massive distribution engine for Solana, for getting retail in the front door, for just supporting a lot of the ecosystem and funding a lot of the stuff that was happening in Solana. But it was also very much held back by the fact that, there was this sort of overlord kind of, hanging over the chain. And once you become freed from that, it's like, okay, well, let's just start changing stuff and making it better and not worrying so much about appearances. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's something there, and something that you've mentioned many times on the show is that going through that really difficult period makes a culture and a community much more tightly bound together, right? Where you see that there aren't a lot of ecosystems that really have community, right? They have hype, they have excitement, they have a brand, they even have people who've made money. But Solana really does have community, and community is one of those things very difficult to break once it's there.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things I noticed actually during the NFT craze in 2021, where everybody's like, oh, we have the strongest community and stuff. And it's like, a community isn't a set of people centered around making the price go higher to sell to another person. You can only gauge the strength when things are going the worst possible way they can go. And I mean, FTX happened, but before then there was the outages and stuff, and people still stuck around. And so it was always like these kind of mini trials and battles, which I think all major ecosystems need to have that to actually form a community. A lot of people now come up to me from other ecosystems, like, how'd you guys do it at Solana? And it's like, well, manufacture a few black swans and then see people stick around. There's also some technical things.
Are you saying there's a psyop? Sam was never really pulling the strings?
That'd be... Yeah, no further comments. Well, and then I think there's some technical aspects to it as well. Like the decision to create a new VM that was not just the EVM makes it such that there's higher switching costs, but then you also need to be actually interested in this tech to want to build there.
Yeah.
So if Solana was an EVM or something and FTX happened, then all these people can just redeploy on another EVM chain. Versus on Solana, it's okay, we already made this decision. We still think it works. The tech still works. But now there's this weird social phenomenon with FTX and stuff. And we can overcome that.
Well, how do you feel about the kind of influx of non-Solana SVM platforms in general? And whether they're rollups, whether they're kind of people trying to build other, in general, the SVM moving outside of its, the main home, what sort of, in your mind, kind of, how do you view that?
So I come at it from more of a developer perspective. It was actually on our pitch deck for Helios a round ago, where it's like, okay, SVM stuff is going to happen and our infrastructure will be able to deploy on it because it's the same. That's how we kind of configured it. I think fundamentally it's just open source software. And as a developer, what you want is a thriving ecosystem of people contributing to the same tech stack. But also you don't want platform risk, such that if you deploy it on Solana, but something happens to Solana, maybe they just start making all these weird changes, maybe Firebase totally flops, like all these different things. You're still not, all your chips are not in, or eggs are not in one basket, and you can redeploy on like something in Atlas with Ellipsis, or another, maybe you can do an SVM app chain like PithNet did, for example. They have their own SVM app chain. So I think from if you like, it's these rollups and L2s and stuff are going to happen. App chains are going to happen regardless of what anybody wants to believe or what anybody wants to call them. And it's obviously better for Solana that they use SVM for this because they're going to use something anyways. So why not use the tech that's already native to Solana? And then, this won't happen all the time, but there'll be learnings from those that the Solana, the L1 can enshrine back into the core protocol, which has actually kind of happened in the past. And then vice versa.
With respect to what?
I mean, like, so we obviously run infrastructure, and like we noticed some things with Eclipse's infrastructure, for example, about the fee markets and like how the transaction queues and stuff. And we were able to like identify those problems and then predict that they would happen during like some larger traffic events.
On mainnet or on Eclipse?
Yeah, on Eclipse, like testnet. And then we were able to like take those and be like, okay, here's our product. Here are some products that will probably be useful going forward, like better transaction fee APIs, transaction landing systems, etc. And so, I think it is absolutely a net good for Solana, because like I think everybody kind of thinks about this in a weird way, but it's like if a business requires an integrated L1 to build their application, like let's say it's a DeFi app. They need like real-time price discovery. They want composability within some other ecosystem teams. Then it's like, okay, then build on the L1. But if it's like a game that doesn't need global state, maybe it's just some isolated state that just does not need to be on the L1. It's like they should just do whatever is best for their business. And because if they arbitrarily pick the L1 just because some people yelled at them, that's not going to be sustainable for the L1 anyways, because those people just move around over time. And so I think as a chain, your goal is how do we identify the best use cases that actually need our tech, who are sticky users, which is why I came up with only possible on Solana. It's like you should aggressively go after people who can only build things with this architecture that can't be easily copied anywhere else. Otherwise, it's just a very short-term game and there's no real moat or anything like that.
Sure.
So actually, one related question. Do you think there will be, in the next 2 years, a centralized exchange that does a base like rollup, but it's an SVM rollup? Because right now, all of the exchange rollups and app chains have been mainly EVM. I mean, BNB chain, I guess, is a weird one historically.
No, BNB chain is EVM.
But the original
BNB Dex was a Cosmos.
Yeah, sorry. I was counting that as like their first.
Yeah, but that was not programmable.
They've had many chains, I guess.
Right.
But I guess my question to you is like, do you think we will see that in the next 2 years? Just
a based SVM rollup that settles on
or not necessarily based, like some centralized exchange, like
an exchange sort of endorsed rollup
like base
that is SVM based.
I think it'll depend very much on the ecosystem tooling available. So I think one of the reasons why like the EVM ones are so prevalent is because there's a lot of tooling like Conduit, Caldera, Optimism Stack, and all these kind of different things. I don't quite see the Solana ecosystem taking the same path there. Like I think there's another one called Soon Network, which is trying to do like SVM, but Optimism Stack or something like that. That could be interesting. But I just don't think the tooling is there. Like it would require a lot of custom stuff, and the exchanges obviously just want security and peace of mind and like easiness and just take my money and then do the thing and then whatnot.
Yeah.
So I actually doubt it. On unless like Helios were like, at Helios was like, okay, we'll just build this because there's a lot of demand for it or something.
I mean, I certainly asked you because I think if there was demand for it, the first person that someone would ask would be you. So.
Yeah. So Solana has this concept of SPEs, special permissioned environments, which is kind of like this, but they are permissioned. And so we ran a few of those. Like there's some demand for it, but it's
what
unclear.
is this like a subnet? What is an SPE?
You can probably think of it as a subnet.
Okay.
It's basically in L1, but it's its custom environment.
Got it.
Pithnet is another example.
Does it connect up in some kind of programmatic way to the main chain, or is it just like this sort of isolated thing?
It's mostly isolated.
Okay.
But like you can configure it however you want.
So you could like import accounts from the main chain, but not write to them, for instance.
You could get creative with stuff like that. Solana's path, it seems to be like maybe like ephemeral rollups, like just rollups that are just around for like some period of time, do all the execution, and then atomically just put it back to the state. Like there's a team called Magic Block that's doing this. Light Protocol and Helios are working on ZK compression.
Yeah.
So I don't think it'll look too skeuomorphic to what already exists today. And also there's just not that many exchanges, I don't think. I think
there's actually a lot, but
like that,
not very many good ones.
Yeah. I think like Robinhood could be an interesting one that I've heard some like, I've read some stuff on Twitter. It's like, well, Coinbase and Base EVM, and then Robinhood is using like Arbitrum, but it's like, if they really want to, a different differentiation, maybe they should use an SVM rollup or something. And then it becomes a BD exercise.
Yeah.
And Solana's approach to BD is quite different, I would say, than like an Optimism or like a Polygon.
Sure. Okay. So speaking of L2s, I want to talk about this concept of network extensions. So this ended up becoming quite controversial. So just to give a little bit of backstory, I'd say historically, a lot of the folks in the Solana ecosystem have been critical of rollups. And rollups, the primary layer 2 construction on Ethereum that's become very popular with things like Arbitrum, Optimism, and so on. And the claim has always been, well, rollups, they're kind of, it's only because Ethereum sucks that it needs rollups and it can't scale and blah, blah, blah. And so then, of course, there's been the rise of these rollup-like things that are either using SVM or that settle directly to Solana itself. And so Austin, who's I think the chief marketing officer, something.
He's the head of strategy.
Head of strategy, of course, for the Solana Foundation, came out and said, I think that maybe instead of thinking about L2s, we should call the L2-like things on Solana network extensions. They're not rollups, they're not L2s, they're network extensions. And this caused a lot of people in the Ethereum ecosystem to get really, really mad, because they were like, no, these are called rollups. We invented them. They're called L2s. You've been shitting on us for making these L2s for a really long time, and now all of a sudden you're co-opting them and giving them a new name. So people got really upset about this. I think, Anatoly came out and defended the concept of network extensions as being distinct from the Ethereum concept of L2s. You came out against the meme, at least, of calling them network extensions. I mostly just saw the drama. I don't actually understand why everyone's so mad, but I get the general vibe. What is your take on why you think this network extensions rebrand / branding exercise is ill-advised?
I think both kind of sides have a point to this, but I think the point of terminology or like semantics is to be very precise about what you're defining, such that there's no ambiguity, such that like when you say the name, you know what to think. Some of these network extension type things are L2s, but a good amount of them are not L2. So for example, ZK compression on Solana is not an L2. It's much more like a stateless client architecture that Ethereum is going for. Or some of them are sovereign rollups. Some of them are like ephemeral rollups. Some of them aren't even remotely anything to do with a rollup or an L2, but they just use that term for marketing.
Right.
And so the problem with the terminology, in my view, is it's too homogenized and it doesn't capture all the differences between these different things. So I get where they're coming from, where it's like, this is not an L2, but you're calling it L2 just because you're used to your own ecosystem's, let's say, problems in the terminology. And that's incorrect. But it's also incorrect to, not call L2s that are actually L2s, not L2s, right? Like, so it's these semantic battles always are weird to me. Like when we launched ZK compression, this was way before the network extension stuff. like Adam Cochrane was like, oh, like this is clearly a Validium and stuff like that. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I built this. Like, it's not. And like all these people will say like, oh, like Solana's just trying to backpedal here. It's like, and then I had to ask Vitalik, and he's like, yeah, this seems like a stateless client architecture. And it's like, you know, unless the Pope says it, nobody believes you, basically. But the naming is, I think, too homogenized for my liking. Like, it's too easy to get confused with these things. I mean, it's still not even clear what a rollup is on the Ethereum side from just if you talk to John Sharp about it, and then like people will comment on John's thing. And
Classic mistake is ask John Sharp what a rollup is.
It's always these things. And I'm like, the fundamental thing that matters is you need to communicate to the audience who's relevant what the properties of the system are with the name itself.
Yeah.
Or like when you say blockchain, you generally understand it's blocks chained together or something like that. You say network extension, it's like, okay, I can kind of see where you're going, but it's a very broad term.
Yeah.
And so
okay,
I think
so your criticism is the exactness and the clarity of the label itself. Tarun, what's your take on the network extensions?
I just don't think
concept?
it makes so much sense. Also, partially due to the clarity piece, but also partially due to the fact that you have restaking on Solana, and the restaking services are called networks, but they're not full rollups at all, right? They provide a much smaller surface area, a much smaller amount of computation, and those things are also inevitably could fall under the same word, network extension, right? Because they are generating some amount of SVM transactions that mainnet verifies, but they're not themselves running the entire kind of arbitrary computation. And so, yeah.
Is Eclipse or Ellipsis, are these also network extensions or no?
Well, those are definitely rollups.
yeah, those are 100% rollups. Now,
So they're not network extensions?
I mean,
Because they settle to Ethereum, they don't settle to Solana.
No, they're absolutely not. They have nothing to do with Solana except for the VM that they use.
Okay, so they're not considered network extensions.
I would not consider them network extensions.
Yeah,
Okay,
Now,
but would Austin consider the network extensions is the question.
I have no idea.
Okay.
But
Can't
what I
speak
would
for us.
Okay, all right.
What I would say though is there are some other weird constructions like magic blocks, like ephemeral rollups, which like for that slot or something, very briefly, they do these off-chain processing and then commit it right back to the state and then pay the same fees. And so you're not actually taking anything away from the L1 really. And so that starts to get a little weird because that doesn't exist in other ecosystems to my knowledge. And so that's, I think, Toli's argument, which is like, okay, that is kind of different. And so it's you know, just, I mean, Tarun has a math background too, but you just have to be very rigorous with the definitions. Otherwise, everybody just starts getting super fucking confused.
Yeah. Or mad.
Yeah.
Tom, what's your take on network extensions?
I generally probably don't know enough.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know if I have a strong opinion.
I mean,
Sorry.
I can say it feels like clearly the reaction to the word network extensions is almost it feels I can see that the Ethereum community feels kind of invalidated. Is that like, okay, we invented a lot of these ideas of coprocessors and rollups and validiums and blah blah blah, and like the whole we created this whole taxonomy. We analyzed the hell out of it for like 5 years because we staked our lives and our futures on this vision of the world coming true. And it sort of feels like, look, I understand that the EVM world and the SVM world have at times been adversarial, but it's like at least show enough respect to just like call them rollups if they're rollups.
This reminds me of like people in the late 90s, early 2000s who were like Windows versus Mac, where like, a memory allocator in Windows would have a certain type of name and a memory allocator in a Mac would have a different type of name. And they were realistically the same thing, but because they called them different things, the two types of developers would like fight.
Right.
And of course they didn't have like a social network to fight, so it was more like at conferences they would yell at each other.
Totally.
Like forums.
But I think this is like true in like a lot of software.
Oh, 100%. But I think it's also like the point that you two are making is a point about, the clarity of a mathematical description of what is this mechanism doing. And in mathematics, it is very, very important to attribute, where did this idea originally come from and be very, very clear about describing it. In business,
to be fair,
you don't do that.
There's a number of theorems in math where the name of they're named after people, but neither of them proved it.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
So,
fine.
like,
Okay.
the
Yes.
Hahn-Banach
True.
theorem,
All right.
for
Fine.
instance, is a great example
It's a
of this.
complicated story sometimes, but in business, like you never name the thing after the original person who came up with it, right? So like there have been, somebody comes up with a query language and somebody like basically copies it and calls it, no, this is Salesforce query dialect, and this one is no, this is the I don't know if I
but this happens like literally all these database companies always
which is I think where a lot of this discrepancy comes from is that look, if you're building a business, of course you want to name the thing after yourself and give it some like mild inflection to like, well, our ecosystem's a little bit different, our needs are a little bit different, so this is not SQL, this is BQL, because whatever. I feel like it's a little bit of what's happening with the network extensions concept, which is naturally because blockchain has both of those elements. Like as you mentioned, the high priests are essentially mathematicians, but then the rank and file are business people who are trying to run businesses. Essentially, it creates this dichotomy.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, both sides have points here. Like I think, you're right that like Ethereum did pioneer a good amount of the rollup stuff in scaling solutions, and they're like, okay, give us some credit. But then Solana also wants the same thing, which is like, these are some things that we built here, like zk compression, which actually does not exist there. And so it's unfair to us if you classify it as what you built, because we actually built this. And so both sides have some good points.
Yeah.
But then I think fundamentally it just misses the whole point if we're just stuck doing semantics for too long.
That's right. So, okay, speaking of semantics, let's talk a little bit about stepping outside of SVM scaling. So, it's been widely understood at this point that Solana, super high performance chain. It's where anybody who wants extremely high throughput is naturally going to pick Solana. But there's a new generation of blockchains that now have incorporated a lot of the learnings from the last 4 or 5 years, including from Solana. And many of them in some sense are a response to Solana. So in that group, I put, Monad, Mega ETH, the SWI, Aptos, as well as some of the new generation rollups like, Eclipse and Ellipsis and so on. What is your take? And I know that you're also an investor in several of these. What is your take on how these things fit into the future of where high performance blockchains are going to go?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, as I said earlier in the episode, I care about the problem of apps. How do we get app developers a platform such that they can actually bring their ideas to life and actually build stuff for crypto?
Yeah.
So I think anybody who helps with that mission is a net good to the industry, provided that all the security and the risks and stuff are very transparently laid out. Which is what I liked about Mega ETH, which is like they basically say, here's what we're going to do, here's how it works, here are the risks, etc., and that's it. And so that's a good approach in my view, because I don't think I don't think all use cases require this global state machine. I don't think everybody needs those properties. And so if you're okay with being in an L2 environment or something for your use case, like a game, I think that totally makes sense. And then things like Monad and stuff. I think, I'm still curious to see how that'll play out. That seems to be more like an EVM play, where it's like a lot of people already have EVM apps. There's already a lot of good tooling around this. Can we tap into that network effect such that we can get those developers who didn't want to come to the SVM and actually get them to build on this new L1? I think that also makes sense. And I mean, that team also used to do some stuff on Solana. So I think that's a net good as well. And then SWI is just doing it completely differently. Like they have a very different architecture in some regards. And they have an object-based model. They have good numbers. And then the question for them seems to be like, okay, can we actually because like bootstrapping a new ecosystem is super difficult. And it seems to be less of a technical thing, but more of a, BD distribution ecosystem, that sort of challenge for them. And so I don't think there will be, like, it's basically impossible for there to be one or two chains that just do everything, in my view.
Sure.
Not even from a technical perspective. Like, I think Tolly could reasonably make the argument that you could support a good amount of activity once a certain threshold of scaling gets met on single L1. But I think it's the incentives of just businesses and economics and culture and all this that make it impossible for that vision to be a reality. I think everybody will want, or I think some people will want like their custom app space, like sovereign rollups or like app chains and stuff like that. Some people will want the generalized L1 that don't want to deal with all these because like the L1s already have a bunch of integrations with wallets and analytics and dexes and all this stuff. They just don't want to bother with all that stuff. They just want to plug into something that works.
Well, to that end, do you think we're basically done on VMs? So we essentially have 4, which is EVM, SVM, WASM, and Move. Do you think there's room for a 5th, or do you think it's basically 20 years from now it's going to be those 4? What's that?
There's a lot of dead.
There are arbitrarily many dead ones. Yeah, correct. That never quite, survived birth. Is your take that you think in 20 years there's going to be 4? Are there going to be 2? Is there going to be just 1 in 20 years?
Oh man, I'm very not comfortable with predicting future stuff.
You're an angel investor now. You vote with your money.
Yeah, I wouldn't invest in it myself. Like I don't think it solves a meaningful enough problem today, or even in 5 years or 10 years that I think is actually a bottleneck. I think like for Solana, the bottleneck is bandwidth and networking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
For other ecosystems, it seems like maybe state growth. And then for other ecosystems, it seems to be not tech at all. And like Sweet seems to be distribution and business, BD. So it really depends on the problems it's saying exists and that it can solve better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And I don't see the VM as being the problem today.
Right. Tarun, what's your take on the VM? By the way, I should clarify, VM means virtual machine. It's basically the language that essentially the programming environment or language that, or sort of operating system that a blockchain runs on top of.
Yeah, I think one place I'd probably differ is I do think the Move ecosystem languages, their tooling is like much more premature. And I don't think it's just a pure business thing. I actually think it's like hard to attract new developers. Like everyone I feel like who's in the Move ecosystem loves the language, but then like doesn't like really, there's no one building tooling. They have this kind of like tragedy of the commons problem, which you oftentimes see in like the beginning of a new language or new virtual machine, where there's a ton of people who really love the new language features and they'll write like prototypes or proof of concepts or like little kind of tiny projects, but nothing that's like in production, like has maintenance, DevOps, whatever, like updates, because the tooling to do that is like annoying, right? And I actually think one thing that Solana got over the hump on was tooling, and like some of that tooling, maybe, there's still people fighting over whether to use Anchor or not, but, some of that tooling, maybe not exactly like the cutting edge of what people want, but they got to the point that I think onboarding a new developer is like significantly easier. Like the nth developer, the cost of onboarding them is significantly less than, the early ones. Whereas I'm not totally sure that's true for Move yet.
Yeah.
It could change, right? Like, I just think I think the gap in terms of how you reason about programming a very secure contract between EVM, where like there's lots of ways you can shoot yourself in the foot, but like there's a ton of established practices and tooling to kind of make sure you don't shoot yourself with a foot gun. SVM, where like because of the performance benefits and because it still mainly looks like normal Rust, you're like fine. You don't need to know that much more if you've written in other programming languages. Move is more like, am I writing in Haskell, right? Like I really do have to think a lot more about like every time I instantiate an object, where it's going. And I think the overhead for a developer varies quite a bit from all these in these ecosystems. And it's really just about like, is there a lot of tooling for making sure you don't shoot yourself, by making a mistake? Remember, like a lot of these applications will have hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in them. So like you really have to be much more careful. And then B, I think I think like all three might survive, but there'll be like kind of some very fast decay where like 50% is in the top VM, 30 is in the second, and then after that you have the tail really small. So
what's also interesting is that oftentimes there is some element of you stand on the shoulders of giants of the infrastructure that has come before you, of people who built, there was, way back in the day, it was Remix for the EVM, and then it was Ganache, and then it was, Foundry. And there is this sort of progression, but it's oftentimes like just one project that ends up making the DevX on a platform just really, really huge step function improvement. And it often feels like it's hard to like find who that person is, who is going to transform this developer ecosystem into just being really, really good and really just a pleasure for people to use. So that's one thing that's surprising. It's almost like a sort of strongman theory of how a developer environment or like how a programming language ends up going from a toy to being actually a really
also
great
think that's
development
going to
environment.
change in the next like 1 year, in the sense like the AI code tools are just so different now that like the learning curve might be a lot smaller.
Right.
So like you could actually see all three of these ecosystems do really well if like they happen to build the cursor for their language that is really good, that like your marginal cost for the next developer is decreasing. Because like I always think of these things as like drawing a curve of like the x-axis.
That's
is like
a very
number
interesting point, right? So that's one of the things about Move is that, you know, it's very easy to formally verify Move code. And now it's only useful if you actually do that, right? If you write Move code and you don't actually use all the advantages that Move confers on you, which it naturally has some just from the object model, but like you sort of have to go the extra mile to actually get all the mileage out of what you're getting with Move. But if we get to a place where AI and basically, you know, these automated software engineering tools, Cursor obviously is a kind of nice first cut, but probably within the next 5 years, we're going to see much more capable autonomous software creation tools. And they might just make it that it's like, okay, well, to the extent that the EVM has these really nice affordances, they just matter a lot less because human beings are writing less of the code.
I also think like we haven't had that many crypto people like fine-tune custom code models the way you have for all these other
Well, Aptos
programming
actually
languages.
has, I think, they did something with, I think, with Microsoft where they fine-tuned some kind of Copilot type thing on Aptos Move.
Maybe I haven't. I've only really looked at and written EVM and SVM contracts, and like, you know, you can see which things it gets right and which things it completely gets wrong.
Right.
And it does feel a lot worse than just like general Rust or like Python, where like the output you get is like significantly better.
But I think that is a large part of function of the fact that the way in which these kind of software engineering stuff is working is very pattern matchy. And I think when we get more and more robust software engineering, you know, O1 is a great example of, you know, being able to explore more of the state space of how you actually write a program and evaluate a program. I think it's going to be much more like you shove an entire language spec into the context window and it just figures out how to write the language.
Yeah. So I guess my answer to your question, if we pop the stack back a few iterations, is I think we're at this very weird juncture where the notion of programming is changing so much that there might actually be this phase transition where all of a sudden it's just as easy to write a Move. And whereas like 6 months ago was like impossible or like to do production stuff. So, and that thing is the biggest unknown uncertainty to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been playing around with this quite a bit. I've been like live streaming some like what you can build with Cursor on Solana, and built like 3 apps with it, like a Explorer, a price tracker, etc. And actually one of the realizations I had was, I think the EVM has a huge advantage there because there's so much more open source material and existing material that the models can actually read off of. Versus on Solana, it was still giving me relatively outdated docs for a bunch of the stuff, and I would have to tell it to fix it, which like you can do, right? Like you can, if you have a spec, you can just say, here, read from this instead. But I think that small friction is, and I think Move will have it even worse because there's less open source stuff available. I think that'll play a big role in my view. And so whoever can, and like, you know, that's what, you know, teams like Helios basically, we actually just added an AI feature to the Explorer, which is not released yet. It took generalized AI to make Solana readable, such that you can, because it actually understands the Solana core docs pretty well, like when you tell it how it works. And then you can kind of use that with like our existing documentation, which is much more up to date than what Cursor has. And then when you combine them, it actually becomes much easier to write Solana code. I think that's, you know, there's probably still like 2 to 3 years left to go until that stuff is more mature. But yeah, I do wonder how it'll evolve exactly. Because you also don't want to, you know, trust it too much for things that hold funds in mainnet, especially. You still need to get audits and stuff. So it's still unknown, but I think the EVM does have a good advantage from just having so much material and data that the models can leverage already.
Well, I think the to your point about the O1 type of like RL type models is like inference time kind of updates is that you can generate code much more efficiently for that you're testing against live. And that means you need a smaller initial data set, provided the initial data set is a good ground truth data set, right? Like maybe if it's outdated by like X number of versions, it won't work.
Right.
But I do think, that could really change the game for these languages that don't have much source material. And so it's very hard to predict where that will go, because that field has evolved so much in the last 6 months that it's like,
but almost certainly software engineering is going to be the first thing to fall as these models get better and better, and we just throw more and more compute time training material against them. Like,
the O1's not just compute time; it's architecture. You know,
We don't know exactly what it's doing. They haven't disclosed much, but some kind of Monte Carlo tree searching
a bunch of my
thing.
old coworkers work on it, and I will say that like it does seem like it's much more about the architecture than it is at all about compute, right? Like I would argue that Anthropic went the route of throw way more compute and synthetic data, and OpenAI went down the route of like treat it more like a game theory thing at inference time.
Right.
And so like my friend who works on the one team, he his PhD was on like building the first bot that like beat humans at poker called Libertus. And they took way more of a like multi-agent game approach than like a generate synthetic data approach. And so I think that's why you're starting to see the difference between Claude and O1. Sorry, this is divergent for our audience.
A little bit of sidetrack. So okay, I want to bring it back to ground us in crypto a little bit more to close out the show. So one of the things that people have been commenting on, crypto's in a little bit of slump over the last month, and we've seen volumes on chain start to retrace a little bit. Solana has been no exception to that. And we also
went
seen
from
highbrow
highbrow to price talk.
Well,
that was a fast.
we got to bring the audience back. So naturally, one of the projects that has been seeing a slump is Pump.Fun, which of course has driven a lot of the on-chain volumes in Solana this year. And so I want to bring back to a question. So we talked a little bit last show that we've seen the sentiment start to turn against Pump.Fun. In that, once upon a time, people were like, oh, Pump.Fun is great. It's democratizing meme coins. This is awesome. And now people are starting to say, well, but Pump.Fun, it's kind of extractive. Is this really good for crypto? I remember we were on a panel together. I think first time I met you in person, we were on a panel together talking about meme coins. I think it was at the last Token 2049.
Yep.
And that was like peak meme coin
Was that
frenzy.
May?
Something like that. Yeah, it was sometime early summer.
Yeah, it was with Ansem and stuff.
It was Ansem. Yeah, Ansem was on stage, and we were all out of our element besides him. And so now that we are very kind of in the late part of the meme coin cycle, seemingly, what is your thoughts on are meme coins and or Pump.Fun good for crypto? What would you say? You can be honest.
Good for crypto. Well, there's a debate about this at Breakpoint with Iggy.
Okay.
And Eric Wall.
And Eric Wall. That'll be a good one. Eric.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But we need the Mert pregame.
I think it's very hard again to homogenize the entire category as good or bad. I think certainly there's meme coins that could be good. Like I think Bonk, for example, is a good meme coin in that they basically fund hackathons, and it's basically a stealth startup that's funded by speculation and things like that. That being said, I think it's just about the only one that's good that I've seen.
I see. This is a very Vitalik-esque take on meme coins.
Like it's the way I think about it when people say like Pump is extractive or it's killed meme coins, and then like Blur killed NFTs. It's like this demand for people doing this stuff existed. Like people wanted to launch coins and buy NFTs and sell. Like they wanted to do this, and a business came to meet that demand, and people were willing to pay money such that they can conduct these activities. So I don't think it's like it's killing anything. It's just it's meeting a demand that already exists in the market.
So you resist the idea that Pump.Fun has agency in the meme coin cycle?
Oh, they certainly have agency, but I don't think like I don't think they can like single-handedly kill a category. Because the category is market driven. It's a market driven sector.
Sure.
Right. Like the market needs to collectively come to some decision or, converge on something, whether they think it's good, bad, which is reflected by the price maybe, or the activity.
Yeah.
But I don't think I think most of them are bad. Like I think most of the meme coins are just useless and obviously are clearly there to just replace some version of a casino.
Do you think casinos are bad?
I don't think casinos are bad. And so my next point was going to be like people want to speculate and gamble on these things. And so now they have a tool to help them do that easier. There's people who don't want to do those things.
Yeah.
And like they shouldn't do those things. Like I don't trade meme coins myself. But like I'm not going to tell you to not do it because I don't.
Because Mert says don't do it.
Yeah. Like if you want to do it, it's a permissionless system, go do it. My problem with it is that when people say like Solana is only good for meme coins, it's like, no, it just turned out to be a place where you can just launch these coins and trade them the easiest, right? It's like, we're not going to add extra friction just for ideological purposes. Like that would be an even worse look in my view.
Sure.
So I don't think they're good or bad. I think there's clearly PMF for people who want to speculate and do these sorts of things. And they should just be able to do whatever they want. Like
it sounds like you're saying they're mostly bad, but then you ended it with they're neither good or bad.
I think individual coins launched are obviously like, if you have an uneducated user that is just like aping into it and they're like, oh, I want to get rich, whatever. It's like they'll learn their lesson, right? Like you
will lose money if you trade meme coins is what you're saying.
You will lose money if you trade meme coins and have no idea what you're doing. Some of these guys do make money. And it's like any other speculative kind of thing. I just feel very, I'm like no one to tell people what they should be doing.
Okay.
So like, I think they can be good, like in the case of Bonk. I think most often in practice, they have been bad.
Yeah.
But I think the entire category itself is just that. It's a category. It's just meeting a demand that people have. And they're going to continue to do it no matter what anybody thinks.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's like extractive though. The only extractive part of it I would say is the sandwich games kind of being played and stuff like that. That's obvious. But we're working to solve the MEV problems on Solana as well. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I mean, that's a good enough answer. Tom, Mert raised the analogy between Blur and Pump.Fun. What do you think of that connection? Because we talked about that on the show as well.
Yeah, I think there are markets where when you add like legibility and efficiency, it kind of kills it. It's like you turn on the lights at the club and it's like, all right, this is a little sad now. Or it's like, it's kind of like how like weed's not cool anymore. You know, like 20 years ago, it was like, it's a little edgy, a little cool. And now it's just like, you can like.
Weed's still cool in Singapore.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot we're in Singapore.
Yeah.
But now it's like a little cringe. It's like, all right, it's not, it's too legible. And I think, meme coins are maybe in a similar bucket where you're trying to like recreate this very organic thing that happened with like kind of like airdrops in some ways too, where it's like, there's a very cool organic moment that happened. And then people basically just like pummel it to death by, trying to make these sort of games on top of it. And I think this is maybe kind of what's happening with meme coins right now, where people want to sort of have that, organic spark that has happened in the past. And then it's like, you can't sort of force that. And then you just, I think kind of kill the market.
You hear that, guys? Tom says it's over.
Sorry.
That's it. All right. With that, we got a wrap. Hopefully to see you guys at Token 2049 and Breakpoint. I think actually I was at a dinner with Raj from Solana, and he was like, I told him, oh yeah, I'm going to be in Singapore for Token 2049, and he was like, you mean for Breakpoint? So I was like, yes, for Breakpoint, Breakpoint as well. So that's it. We'll see all you guys next week. Thanks everyone.
Yeah.